The massive screens above the galactic arena flashed with breaking news as a small transport ship dropped out of hyperspace. The vessel looked plain and outdated compared to the sleek ships that usually brought contestants to the games. The gathered aliens whispered and pointed, their many eyes fixed on this unexpected arrival. Inside the ship, Marcus Stone sat quietly, his weathered hands resting on his knees. He wore a simple black combat suit with Earth's flag patch on the shoulder, the only sign of his home world. Through the viewport, he could see the arena station growing larger. The structure was enormous, a ring of gleaming metal and pulsing energy fields that had hosted the galaxy's greatest warriors for centuries. Approaching Docking Bay 7, the ship's AI announced. Please prepare for landing procedures. Marcus took a deep breath. 6 months ago, he had been running combat training on Earth when the aliens first made contact. Now he was about to become the first human to step into their sacred fighting grounds. The ship shuddered as it passed through the docking bay's force field. In the arrival hall, a crowd had gathered to see this curiosity from Earth. Tall, elegant aliens with iridescent skin stood next to bulky warriors covered in natural armor. Some floated in anti-gravity fields, while others moved on multiple legs or appendages. Their chatter filled the air with clicks, whistles, and electronic translations. Marcus stepped out of his ship, his boots making the solid sound on the metal floor. The crowd fell silent for a moment, then burst into laughter. He was shorter than most of them, with no obvious weapons or modifications. To their eyes, he looked weak and primitive. "This is Earth's champion." A deep voice boomed through the hall. A massive warrior pushed through the crowd, his crystalline body catching the light. "I expected something more impressive from a species bold enough to enter our arena." Marcus said nothing, studying the crystal warrior with calm eyes. His silence seemed to annoy the alien even more. "Can it even speak?" Another voice called out. "Perhaps they sent us a defective specimen." The laughter grew louder. Marcus continued walking, his movements measured and controlled. He had expected this reaction. Earth was new to the galactic community, and humans didn't look impressive compared to these evolved and enhanced beings. But he knew something they didn't. Humanity's strength didn't come from physical power. The registration official, a tall being with 6 eyes and flowing robes, looked down at Marcus with obvious doubt. "You understand that the arena fights are not simulated. Death is a common outcome for unprepared contestants." "I understand," Marcus replied simply. His voice was quiet but firm. "Your species has no natural armor, no energy manipulation abilities, no significant biological advantages," the official continued. "Do you wish to withdraw your application? There would be no shame." Marcus shook his head. "I'm here to compete." The official's eyes blinked in sequence. "Very well. You will be assigned to the lowest qualification bracket. Your first match is tomorrow. I suggest you use the time to reconsider your decision." As Marcus walked to his assigned quarters, he could hear the aliens making bets on how quickly he would die. Some were wagering he wouldn't survive the first minute. He allowed himself a small smile. Let them underestimate him. He had spent the last 6 months studying recordings of their fights, learning their patterns, their weaknesses. In his room, Marcus unpacked his few belongings and began his preparation routine. While other contestants might be enhancing themselves with technology or practicing ancient combat arts, he reviewed fight recordings and planned strategies. He knew that tomorrow would be just the beginning. Win or lose, he would show them what humans could do. The arena's artificial night cycle began, dimming the lights throughout the station. In other quarters, warriors meditated, powered up weapons, or underwent last-minute modifications. Marcus simply closed his eyes, his mind clear and focused. He had carried humanity's hopes across the stars to this place. Tomorrow, he would show the galaxy that true strength wasn't always visible on the surface. The first human in the galactic arena drifted off to sleep, ready for whatever challenges awaited him. Above the station, stars burned in the darkness, witnesses to this small beginning that would soon shake the foundations of galactic society. The qualification arena looked different up close. Marcus stood in the entry tunnel, studying the combat zone through the energy barrier. Unlike the grand main arena, this was a simple circular space with various obstacles scattered around. Perfect for weeding out the weak, as the aliens put it. His opponent was already waiting. A bright crest warrior with 4 muscular arms and metallic skin that gleamed under the harsh lights. The alien stood nearly 3 meters tall, each hand gripping a different weapon. The crowd in the small viewing area buzzed with excitement, eager to see the human's swift defeat. Round 1 of qualifications, beginning in 30 seconds, the arena AI announced, Contestant Stone versus Contestant Brightblade. Victory by surrender or incapacitation. Marcus rolled his shoulders, keeping his breathing steady. He carried no weapons. They had all been deemed too primitive for arena combat, but he had watched hours of Brightcrest fights. They were powerful but predictable, relying on their extra arms to overwhelm opponents. The barrier dropped. Brightblade charged forward with a roar, all 4 weapons slashing in deadly arcs. Marcus waited until the last possible moment, then simply stepped aside. The alien's momentum carried him forward, his attacks cutting through empty air. Confusion rippled through the crowd. They had expected the human to try blocking or running. Instead, Marcus moved like water, each step precise and calculated. Brightblade spun around, weapons blazing with energy, but hit nothing but air. Stand and fight, primitive. The alien warrior bellowed, frustration clear in his voice. Marcus didn't respond. He continued his careful movement, studying how his opponent shifted weight between steps, noting which attacks flowed smoothly and which showed slight delays. The crowd's excited cheers turned to murmurs of confusion. After 3 minutes of this dance, Brightblade's attacks grew wilder. His 4 arms no longer moved in perfect sync. Marcus saw his opening. As the alien launched another charge, Marcus dropped and rolled. Not away, but toward his opponent. He came up inside Brightblade's guard, where the long weapons were useless. What happened next was too fast for most spectators to follow. Marcus struck specific points on the alien's body, joints, balance centers, nerve clusters that his research had revealed. He didn't need superhuman strength. He just needed to understand leverage and anatomy. Brightblade toppled, his own weight and momentum turned against him. Before he could recover, Marcus had him in a lock that pinned 3 of his arms using the 4th. The more the alien struggled, the more his own strength worked against him. Yield, Marcus said quietly. It was the first word he had spoken since entering the arena. The crowd fell silent. A Brightcrest warrior, losing to a human using no weapons. It seemed impossible. But after another moment of futile struggling, Brightblade tapped the ground in surrender. Victory to Contestant Stone, the AI announced. The surprise in its artificial voice was almost comical. As Marcus walked out of the arena, he could hear the shocked discussions. Some claimed it was luck. Others demanded investigations into hidden technology. But a few older warriors watched him with new interest. He won his next 4 qualification matches in similar fashion. Against the energy-wielding Prism fighter, he used the arena's conductive floor to disrupt their attacks. When facing a massive tank-like creature, he let it tire itself out charging around the arena. Each victory was different, but they all showed the same pattern: observation, adaptation, and precise action. In the preparation room before his final qualification match, Marcus reviewed his notes. The aliens had started taking him seriously now, but they still didn't understand. They saw his victories as clever tricks, not realizing that adaptability itself was humanity's greatest weapon. Final qualification match in 5 minutes, the AI announced. Contestant Stone, proceed to the arena. Marcus stood, rolling his neck to loosen the muscles. Through the walls, he could hear the crowd had grown larger. Word had spread about the strange human fighter. Good. Let them watch. Let them learn. He wasn't just fighting for victory anymore. Every match was a lesson for the galaxy. Never judge a species by their appearance, because sometimes the most dangerous weapon isn't claws or energy beams or extra limbs. Sometimes it's the simple ability to observe, think, and adapt. The main arena was a different world compared to the qualification rounds. Floating cameras captured every angle as Marcus walked toward the fighting ground. The sphere-shaped space could change its internal layout at will, creating endless combinations of terrain and obstacles. Today, it had formed into a series of floating platforms over a deep pit. "This is unprecedented," the main announcer's voice boomed through the stadium. A human contestant, barely out of qualifications, facing the 9th-ranked fighter in the galaxy. One must admire their courage. Marcus ignored the thinly veiled mockery. His opponent, a floating creature made of pure energy, hovered at the arena center. In previous matches, it had simply overwhelmed its opponents with waves of burning plasma. But Marcus had noticed something in the old fight recordings, a pattern in the energy pulses, like a heartbeat. The fight began without warning. The energy being launched a barrage of plasma bolts that turned the nearest platform to slag. But Marcus was already moving, jumping between platforms with precise timing. Each leap looked random to the crowd, but he was counting in his head, tracking the pulses. "Fascinating movement from the human," a different announcer commented. "But running can only delay the inevitable." Marcus wasn't running. He was leading his opponent through the platforms, letting them destroy more and more of the arena. The floating creature followed, growing more aggressive with each missed attack. The crowd watched in confusion as their favorite seemed to be winning, yet somehow couldn't land a finishing blow. Then Marcus reached the highest platform. The energy being rose up, gathering power for a final attack. The moment it released its blast, Marcus dropped. He fell past all the destroyed platforms, their melted edges now covered in conductive material. The energy creature's own attacks had created a web of conductors through the arena. The beam tried to follow, but its plasma form connected with the conductive paths. Its energy scattered, trying to flow through too many directions at once. Within seconds, it had spread so thin it could barely hold its form. The match ended with the creature having to reform at its starting point, too dispersed to continue. "Victory to the human contestant," the AI declared, its tone suggesting it had just witnessed something impossible. The crowd wasn't laughing anymore. Arena fighting wasn't just about power. It was about understanding the environment, the opponent, and yourself. Marcus had turned the entire arena into his weapon without throwing a single punch. His next matches showed the same pattern. Against a warrior who could control gravity, Marcus used the fighter's own power to slingshot debris at crucial moments. When facing a time-manipulating creature, he set up chains of events that would play out regardless of how time flowed. The arena's commentators began speaking of him differently. They stopped treating his victories as flukes and started analyzing his strategies. Some even began studying old Earth military history, trying to understand where these tactics came from. "The human fights like water," one veteran commentator observed, "not forcing its way through obstacles, but flowing around them, wearing them down, using their own strength against them." In the competitors' area, other fighters started keeping their distance from Marcus. Not out of contempt now, but caution. They had seen him turn fighters' greatest strengths into weaknesses. Nobody wanted to reveal anything he might use later. Between matches, Marcus spent hours in his quarters, studying fight recordings and making notes. He knew the opponents would only get tougher. Each victory taught the others more about human capabilities. They would start adapting to his strategies, forcing him to think of new approaches. But that was fine. Adaptation went both ways. Every match showed him new possibilities, new ways to use the arena itself as a tool. The very act of others learning to counter his tactics proved humanity's point. Intelligence and adaptability were worth more than raw power. As he prepared for his next match, Marcus allowed himself a small smile. The aliens had built this arena to showcase the galaxy's greatest warriors, never imagining that their elaborate combat stage would become a proving ground for humanity's greatest strengths. Every fight was a lesson, teaching the galaxy that true power came in many forms. The arena's lights dimmed, signaling the approach of his next match. Marcus stood, ready to show them something new. After all, the best way to prove humanity's worth wasn't with words, but with actions that no one could deny. The arena's rest area fell silent as Bright Steel stormed in, his cybernetic parts humming with barely contained power. The defending champion's star pupil towered over Marcus, who sat calmly reviewing his match data on a tablet. "You mock us with your presence," Bright Steel's voice boomed through enhanced vocal processors, "using tricks and cowardly tactics instead of facing your opponents with honor." Marcus continued reading, his lack of response drawing whispers from the gathered fighters. Bright Steel's cybernetic eye glowed brighter with anger. "Tomorrow, in the quarterfinals, I will show the galaxy how pathetic your species truly is. No more running. No more hiding behind the arena's features. Just pure combat." Marcus finally looked up, his calm gaze meeting Bright Steel's burning cybernetic eyes. "Every tool is a weapon if you hold it right," he said quietly. The old Earth saying made the alien warrior step back, confusion crossing his partially mechanical face. That evening, the arena's entertainment channels couldn't stop replaying the confrontation. Bright Steel had won his last 15 matches through overwhelming force, his cybernetic enhancements crushing all opposition. The odds makers had him as a heavy favorite, predicting Marcus's luck would finally run out. The next day, the arena was packed. The floor had been set to its most basic configuration, a flat, circular platform with nowhere to hide. Bright Steel had demanded this setup, determined to prove human weakness in the simplest possible environment. Today's quarterfinal match features the rising star Bright Steel, enhanced champion of the Cyber Collective, against the surprising human contestant Marcus Stone. The announcer's voice carried a note of excitement. Bright Steel has promised a decisive victory to honor his mentor, the current champion. Marcus stepped onto the platform wearing the same simple combat suit he'd worn since day one. Across from him, Bright Steel's cybernetic parts shifted and whirred, weapon systems emerging from hidden compartments. "Still no weapons," Bright Steel's enhanced voice carried across the arena. "Your arrogance will be your end." The match began. Bright Steel launched forward with hydraulic-powered speed, his enhanced limbs moving in perfect computerized precision. But instead of dodging, Marcus stepped forward to meet him. The crowd gasped as human and machine collided. But where Bright Steel's previous opponents had been crushed by his power, Marcus moved with the impact. He redirected force rather than blocking it, letting momentum carry his opponent past him. Bright Steel spun with mechanical precision, launching a barrage of strikes. Marcus weaved between them, his movements economical and precise. He wasn't dodging randomly. Each move brought him closer, inside the optimal range of the cybernetic systems. "Fight back!" Bright Steel roared, his attacks growing fiercer but less controlled. His cybernetic parts were overclocking, pushing beyond safe limits in an attempt to land a solid hit. Marcus remained silent, conserving his energy. He had studied Bright Steel's previous matches carefully. The warrior relied on his enhancements, trusting computer targeting and power calculations. But that meant his moves were predictable to anyone who understood the underlying patterns. The fight continued, Bright Steel's attacks growing wilder as his frustration mounted. His cybernetic parts began to overheat, warning lights flashing across his armored frame. But pride wouldn't let him slow down or reset his systems. Then Marcus struck. Not with power, but with precise hits to expose joints and cooling vents. Each strike was calculated, targeting the weaknesses he had identified in hours of studying cybernetic anatomy. Bright Steel's systems began to fail one by one, his movements becoming jerky and uncoordinated. In his rage to crush the human, he had pushed his enhancements too far. Now they were shutting down to prevent catastrophic failure. The mighty warrior fell to one knee, his cybernetic parts locked in emergency shutdown. Marcus stood before him, still calm, still ready. "Yield," Marcus said softly, just as he had in his first qualification match. There's no shame in it. The arena held its breath. Bright Steel looked up at the human who had defeated him not through superior technology or strength, but through understanding and patience. "I yield," he said, his natural voice sounding strange without the electronic enhancement. As Marcus helped his fallen opponent up, the crowd erupted in cheers. They had witnessed something unprecedented, a victory of skill and strategy over pure power. The human had proven that true strength wasn't measured in mechanical enhancements or raw force, but in the ability to understand and adapt. Marcus knew something was wrong when the arena's medical team insisted on a special examination before his semifinal match. Their scanners passed over his body again and again, searching for hidden technology or biological enhancements that didn't exist. "This is taking longer than usual," he said, watching the doctors exchange worried glances. He had seen that look before, people following orders they didn't agree with. In the viewing box high above, members of the Arena Council were having a heated discussion. The human's success had become more than just an upset in their tournament. It was becoming a political problem. "The betting houses are losing fortunes," one counselor argued, his scaled skin reflecting the room's lights. "The combat enhancement industry is facing questions about their product's worth. We must do something." Another counselor, her crystalline form shimmering with concern, spoke up. "But he has broken no rules. His victories are unusual, but legitimate. Rules can be interpreted in many ways." A third voice cut in. This one belonged to Goldcrest, owner of the galaxy's largest combat enhancement corporation. "Perhaps we should review the definition of natural abilities more closely." Down in the medical bay, the examination continued well past its scheduled time. Marcus's opponent for the semifinals, a legendary warrior named Stormwing, was already in the arena. The crowd grew restless waiting. Then a medical officer approached Marcus with an apologetic look. "We found irregularities in your brain chemistry," she said, not meeting his eyes. "Higher than normal problem-solving capabilities could be considered an illegal enhancement." Marcus sat up slowly. "You're saying human intelligence is against the rules?" Before she could answer, the door slid open. Bright Steel walked in, his cybernetic parts still showing damage from their quarter-final match. The medical team stepped back in surprise. "The council sent you to disqualify him," Bright Steel said. "It wasn't a question, because he shows us truths we don't want to see." The medical officer looked down at her datapad. "We have our orders." "Then I withdraw from the Cyber Warrior program." Bright Steel's voice rang through the room. "If human adaptability is an illegal enhancement, then surely my mechanical parts are as well." The medical team froze. Bright Steel was a hero to the enhanced warrior community. His withdrawal would cause chaos in the cybernetic enhancement industry. Up in the council chamber, Goldcrest's communicator chimed with urgent messages. The news of Bright Steel's threat was spreading. More enhanced warriors were saying they would withdraw too if the human was disqualified. "We cannot afford this scandal," the scaled counselor admitted. "The arena's reputation is already changing." The crystalline counselor finished. "Perhaps that's not a bad thing." Marcus walked into the arena 10 minutes later, the medical team's reluctant clearance finally granted. The crowd's cheers held a different tone now. They had heard about the attempted disqualification. Many of them had placed new bets supporting him. Stormwing waited in the arena, his energy wings crackling with power. "They tried to stop this match," the legendary warrior said as Marcus approached. "Yes, because they fear what you represent." Stormwing's wings pulsed brighter. "Change." Marcus nodded. In just a few weeks, he had disrupted centuries of arena tradition. Not through superior strength or advanced technology, but by showing different way to approach problems. "Your next move is important," Stormwing continued. "Not just for this match, but for what it means. If you win through skill and strategy, you prove them wrong. If you lose the same way, you still prove them wrong." The starting signal sounded. Stormwing launched himself skyward, energy wings leaving trails of light. Marcus settled into a ready stance, mind already working on solutions. This fight wasn't just about reaching the finals anymore. It was about proving that progress didn't always come from stronger weapons or better enhancements. Sometimes it came from seeing things differently, from having the courage to try new approaches. As Stormwing dove toward him, Marcus allowed himself a small smile. The council had tried to stop him because they thought he was disrupting their system. They didn't realize that disruption was exactly what their system needed. The arena fell silent as Thunderscale entered. The defending champion moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had never known defeat. His scaled armor gleamed under the lights, each plate marked with the scars of 100 victories. At 4 meters tall, he made Marcus look tiny in comparison. The final match had drawn the largest crowd in arena history. Every seat was filled, and view screens across the galaxy carried the broadcast. They had all come to see if the humans' incredible run would end at the hands of the undefeated champion. "Quite a journey you've had," Thunderscale's voice rumbled across the arena floor. "But it ends here, little human. I am not like the others you faced." Marcus studied his opponent carefully. The champion was right. He wasn't like the others. Where previous fighters had shown off their powers or tried to intimidate him, Thunderscale simply waited, perfectly still, watching him with ancient eyes. The arena itself had been set to its most complex configuration. Multiple levels, shifting platforms, environmental hazards, all the elements that Marcus had used to win his previous matches. But Thunderscale had requested this setup, not him. "Your tricks won't work on me," the champion said, reading Marcus's thoughts. "I have watched every match you fought. I understand how you think." The starting signal sounded. Neither fighter moved immediately. They circled each other slowly, two predators acknowledging a worthy opponent. The crowd held its breath, sensing this fight would be different. Thunderscale struck first, his movement blindingly fast despite his size. But instead of his usual overwhelming attack, he matched Marcus's own style, efficient, precise strikes aimed at weak points. He was using human techniques. Marcus barely dodged, realizing the truth. The champion hadn't just watched his matches. He had learned from them. Each attack showed elements of different fighting styles, adapted and improved by centuries of experience. The fight moved across the arena's levels. When Marcus tried to use the environment, Thunderscale was already there, turning the same advantages against him. When he attempted to analyze patterns, the champion changed tactics completely. "You taught us well," Thunderscale said during a brief pause. "That adaptation is the truest strength. Now let me show you mastery of that lesson." The next series of attacks drove Marcus back. Everything he had used to win previous fights was being used against him. Thunderscale had taken human adaptability and combined it with his species' natural power and centuries of combat experience. But Marcus didn't give up. With each exchange, he learned too. Thunderscale was powerful, but not invincible. His attacks were perfect, but perhaps too perfect. There was a pattern in his adaptations, a logic that could be understood. The fight continued, both fighters taking damage. Marcus's combat suit was torn, while Thunderscale's scales showed new scars. The crowd watched in amazement as the human held his own against their greatest champion. Then Marcus saw it. Thunderscale's perfection was his weakness. He adapted instantly to any strategy, but that meant his responses were predictable in their unpredictability. Like a computer program, he would always choose the optimal counter. Marcus began making mistakes on purpose, small errors in his technique, slight hesitations in his movements. Thunderscale responded perfectly each time, his counters becoming more and more precise. But they were responses, not initiatives. The champion realized the trap too late. Marcus's apparent mistakes had formed a larger pattern, leading Thunderscale into a position he couldn't counter perfectly. There were too many possible attacks to defend against, too many variables to calculate. In that moment of confusion, Marcus struck. Not with power or special technique, but with a simple, straightforward attack that no combat algorithm could have predicted. Sometimes the best move was the obvious one that everyone expected you to be too clever to try. Thunderscale staggered back, actually laughing. "Brilliant," he said, genuine respect in his voice. "Using predictability itself as a weapon, making your own weakness into strength." The champion looked at his opponent with new understanding. This wasn't just about winning or losing anymore. It was about showing that true mastery meant knowing when to break patterns, when to be simple instead of clever, when to go against your own nature. The fight wasn't over. Both warriors still stood ready to continue. But something had changed. This wasn't human versus alien anymore. It was two masters of adaptation, pushing each other to be better, showing the galaxy what real strength looked like. The medical bay was quiet except for the soft hum of healing units. Marcus and Thunderscale lay in adjacent recovery pods, their epic battle having pushed both warriors to their absolute limits. Neither had emerged as a clear victor. The match had ended in a draw when both fighters could no longer continue. "You know," Thunderscale's deep voice was gentle now, all traces of battle fury gone. "In 300 years of arena combat, I've never seen the crowd react like that." He was right. When the match was declared a draw, there had been no disappointment, no demands for a tiebreaker. Instead, the arena had erupted in thunderous applause that lasted for nearly an hour. Fighters from every species had stood and cheered, recognizing that they had witnessed something extraordinary. "They're already calling it the match of ages," a familiar voice said from the doorway. Bright Steel walked in, his cybernetic parts fully repaired. "And the changes have already begun." The news feeds confirmed it. Combat enhancement companies were shifting their focus from pure power upgrades to adaptability training. The betting houses had created new categories for technical skill and strategic thinking. Even the arena itself was being modified to encourage more creative approaches to fighting. "The Council wants to speak with both of you," Bright Steel continued. "Once you've recovered, of course." 3 days later, Marcus and Thunderscale stood before the Arena Council. The chamber looked different now. More species were represented, including some that had previously been considered too physically weak for arena combat. "We have been doing things the same way for centuries," the crystalline counselor began. Perhaps it was time for change. The council had already passed new rules. Power and natural advantages were still respected, but they would no longer be the only path to victory. The arena would become a place where all species could demonstrate their unique strengths. "We would like to establish a new training program," Goldcrest announced, surprising everyone. The Enhancement Corporation owner had undergone his own change of perspective, one that combines traditional combat with strategic thinking and adaptive techniques, and we want both of you to lead it. Marcus looked at Thunderscale, who nodded in approval. They had already discussed something similar during their recovery. Their match had proved that the combination of different approaches created something greater than either could achieve alone. The changes spread beyond the arena. Species that had been dismissed as weak or primitive were now being seen in a new light. The galaxy was learning that strength came in many forms, and that adaptability was perhaps the greatest power of all. In the following weeks, Marcus received a message from Earth. The video showed people gathered in streets and parks, watching recordings of his matches. He had done more than prove humanity's worth. He had shown the galaxy a new way of thinking. "You've started something remarkable," Thunderscale said as they watched new fighters training. Young warriors were learning to combine their natural abilities with strategy and adaptability. Some were even intentionally limiting their powers, forcing themselves to find creative solutions. "We all did," Marcus replied. "Sometimes people just need to see that there's another way." The arena continued to evolve. The following year's tournament featured fighters from dozens of new species. There were still mighty warriors with incredible powers, but now they fought alongside strategic thinkers and tactical experts. Every match became a unique demonstration of skill and intelligence. Marcus stayed on as a trainer, working with Thunderscale to teach the next generation. Their contrasting styles and shared respect created a new form of combat art that drew students from across the galaxy. Even those who never intended to fight came to learn about adaptation and creative problem-solving. One day, watching a young fighter combine 3 different species techniques in a practice match, Thunderscale turned to Marcus. "You know, when you first arrived, I thought you would change the arena. I was wrong." Marcus looked at him questioningly. "You changed the galaxy," the former champion continued. "You showed us that true evolution isn't about becoming stronger or faster. It's about learning to see things differently, about having the courage to try new approaches." Marcus smiled, watching the diverse group of fighters training together. In the end, he hadn't just proven humanity's worth, he had helped create something new. A future where strength wasn't measured by power alone, but by the ability to adapt, to think, and to grow. The galaxy would never be quite the same. And that was exactly as it should be.